Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the next webinar for the Barbara Bush Foundation Adult Literacy XPRIZE. We have Katie Beck from 4.0 Schools again here to give our next webinar. So I'm going to turn it straight over to her and take it away, Katie. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Everybody, happy to be here again. Thanks so much, Ben, for asking me to join. We're big fans of XPRIZE and excited to be helpful to anybody on the call. So today I'm going to run through some thoughts on customer development, and as I go, feel free to chime in on the chat, I believe, right, Ben, with any questions, and I'll stop as we go, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. Does that sound right, Ben?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So quick review for those of you who weren't with us on the last Design Thinking webinar. I'm Katie. I am the COO at 4.0 Schools. I am a former educator as well as a longtime startup coach, and excited to be with you today. I'll flash my email again at the end in case you have any questions. And just quick context, 4.0 Schools is a national nonprofit organization, and at its core, we're a community of really gutsy people, entrepreneurs who are building the future of school by building education startups and schools. And we support people at those earliest phases with 3 core programs. Startup Weekend Education, which hopefully is happening in a community near you, 3 days long. It's a great place to get together with like-minded people and test your idea quickly, develop a prototype by the end of the weekend. Essentials is a 3-day boot camp that's a bit of a smaller cohort, about 20 people. We run it in New York and New Orleans roughly every other month. And that's a great place if you're early stage with your idea, but you're already testing it, want to get more feedback within a community and a group. And then our launch program is an accelerator that supports people who are at the launch phase to actually take their early stage prototyping and piloting and turn it into a sustainable organization and go to market. And our whole community is connected through coaching opportunities and connection opportunities and an annual summit. So please let me know later on if you're interested in hopping into that community. So what we're here to talk about today is customer development. And my hunch from hearing about the folks who are working on the XPRIZE is that you guys are probably fairly familiar with this framework. And so I'm not going to go with the beginner 101 version. I'm going to go a little bit more into some things that we've seen entrepreneurs trip up on as they've really delved into the customer development process. So I'm imagining a lot of people on this call are familiar with what's in front of them right now. It's a lean canvas, and it's definitely the tool that we rely on the most and most people rely on to do customer development work. And this lean canvas, or you can use a business model canvas, which is a little bit different, really forces you to consider not just what beautiful product are you making, but how is this actually going to run as a sustainable, aligned business that has all of the building blocks in place. And when anyone is designing an initial business, the thing to realize is that they're all guesses, like it says in all of the boxes here. Everything we're creating is just a guess about how people are going to behave, about what they're willing to pay, about where you'll find your customers. And it can be really tempting as an entrepreneur to just go in a closet and build something beautiful and have the if we build it, they will come mentality. And customer development is all about pushing us to say, don't do that, because the worst thing that could happen is that you end up with tons of lines of code or months and months of work, and actually you've created something that there's not really a business around. And so before going further, just want to give a quick shout out and plug for these books if you haven't read them. Again, my hunch is a lot of people have, but the best customer development books that I know of are these 3. Eric Ries's The Lean Startup, which really goes through how to think about this as a process, using the lean canvas as a starting point, 4 Steps to Epiphany, and Business Model Generation, which uses more of the business model canvas. So I'm borrowing a lot of their work in this presentation. So going back to the process itself, I would really think of it as 2 things. And I'll go on to show kind of where sometimes entrepreneurs can get into trouble. One is this is a framework for interrogating reality. And interrogating reality is one of my favorite phrases because it's really easy to convince ourselves that we know what the problem is, that we know exactly who's going to buy our product. And customer development and using the lean canvas is all about stepping back and suspending those beliefs and saying, I am going to go interrogate reality and find out if that's actually true or not, and be okay if it's not, and ready to pivot. The second thing that it's all about is finding a repeatable business model versus a sexy product. Again, it's easy to convince ourselves that, we have friends come over and we show them the product we're working on and we think everybody likes it. But the customer development process is really more of an analytical way to ask yourself, do I have the right value for the right customer? And have I thought about the right way to deliver that value to the customer? So as I go through, I'm going to walk through 3 sort of tips or pointers for the customer development process, and I'm going to use this awesome guy as an example as I go. This is Aditya. He is an entrepreneur headquartered in New York City. He's a lifetime engineer and is really thinking about how to bring more maker education to especially K-12 schools, and his true passion lies in bringing it to underserved students in K-12 schools. He's done a lot with maker spaces, but feels like there's not enough happening in schools to support that. So we're going to look at how he used the customer development process to really hone in on who his customer was and what the value he was delivering was. So this is what his canvas looked like at the start. And you'll see that several of his boxes are blank. That's something we do at 4.0 schools. It might not be what you hear at every customer development webinar, but we feel like it's critical to really focus in on the most important questions, which are customer, problem, solution, and value. Everything else is kind of a later stage question in our minds, and if it doesn't really matter how you're getting to a customer if it's not the right customer to begin with. And so we really focus our entrepreneurs to think about these categories first before moving on to sort of tier 2 questions. So when Aditya started, this is what he was working with. He had a hunch on the customer segment side on the right that there were a set of public schools, so he was doing a B2B model, that were really interested in education, maker education, but didn't really know how to get started. They had a small budget for it, but they hadn't bought any tools yet. They were kind of at a loss. And that their problem was that they were being pushed to be on this leading edge of STEM, but they were having a hard time implementing the Maker Ed, and teachers weren't really using it if they'd even bought anything at all. And so what he was thinking was the value that they needed was a really easy way to get up and running with Maker Ed, and also potentially that they needed some portability so multiple teachers in the school could use it. And his solution initially in his head was a maker cart that had 3D printers, kind of like a laptop cart, as well as training and curriculum. And so he went out with this business plan, and as the saying goes, no business plan survives its first encounter with customers, and that's absolutely what happened with Aditya. So let's look at how that happened. So the first tool I want to talk about are customer development interviews, and these are a major tool that most people use to validate and discover whether they've identified a customer that has the problem that they think they have. And when you're doing customer development, one thing that I've seen entrepreneurs get confused on is that often people think this is a selling moment, that the goal of a customer development interview is just to sell the thing you have in mind. They're leading with the solution instead of really investigating, does this person have a problem I can solve? And so I would definitely encourage you, if you're in the midst of doing customer development interviews or you're about to start doing them, the first question to ask yourself is, am I going in with my solution already on the forefront, or can I put that on the shelf for a second? And instead think about these goals. Is there a repeatable customer? So that means you're finding evidence. Sometimes I think of it as like finding a species in the wild. Is there like a species of customer that you're seeing repeated incidents of? Who is that early adopter? That's a big question of customer development interviews. You're trying to find the people who most feel the problem. And it's an opportunity to test the assumptions that you have, because again, they're just guesses on your lean canvas about your customer, your problem, your solution, and your value proposition, the highest risk parts of your lean canvas. And it's an opportunity to learn as much as possible. So you don't really need or want to go into a customer development interview until you have this initial thoughts on your lean canvas, just like Aditya did. So before you go in, you want to really define your assumptions. And again, shout out to Steve Blank. He has a really good list of what types of assumptions you should have going into the conversation. So one, you're assuming they have the problem. If they don't, if you find out this is not really something that they're feeling pain around, then you should stop immediately, because no matter how beautiful your product is, they're never going to feel like it's scratching an itch that they really have. The second one, which I think often entrepreneurs don't fully internalize, is that they understand they have a problem. And so to even go back to Aditya's example, it may be a large-scale problem that schools aren't yet implementing Maker Ed, because we know that there are going to be so many jobs in this arena. But if you're talking to schools that don't know that they have that problem, that they don't feel the pain around implementing Maker Ed, then they're probably not ready. They're probably not going to, again, take your beautiful product. And if that's the case, the hardest thing to do is to convince someone that they have a problem. You're already trying to convince them that you're the best person to solve it. You don't want to have to prove it to them in the first place. The third and fourth thing I think are really, really great evidence to find in an interview, that they are already trying to find a solution to this problem, or that they've hacked together their own solution. So if a problem is truly painful for us or for an institution, they're going to already be doing something about it. And this is the best way to avoid false positives. So something that often will happen in an interview, somebody will say, sure, like, I guess I have that problem. But if they're not already trying to find a solution, or they're not hacking together an alternative, then that might be evidence that the problem's actually not that strong. And then the last one that's really important, obviously, also, is that they're willing to pay for it. That if you're looking at B2B, that there's already money being dedicated to this issue, or that a customer is already spending money on something in this arena. So once you have your assumptions really written down and figured out, and I would suggest you actually write on a piece of paper, these are the assumptions I'm testing in this interview, then you go ahead and design your script. And this is the flow that I would suggest for customer development issues, because it allows you to stop if you realize you're talking to the wrong person. So I would think about it as three general pieces. The first is that you're really testing for the problem. Are you right that this person has a very intense problem that there is some value you could provide? Again, go for stories. So asking someone if they have a problem is probably not as good as saying, tell me about the last time you blank. So for Aditya, it would be much more effective for him to say, tell me about how you've thought about buying 3D printers and how that's happened earlier this year, than it would be to say, what's your vision for maker education? And again, watch for those false positives. You want to find evidence that they're actually already doing something to try to solve their problem in order to know it's really a fierce enough problem. The second aspect of it is to really test, one more thing on the test for problem. If you do find out they have the problem, you want to really start digging as much as possible. So don't just like check it off. You want to go below the problem and start to understand what are the like very individual pain points. What are the moments in their day where this is causing more issues? You want to walk out with an even more complex understanding. The second section is all about testing for feasibility. So even if somebody feels a problem really acutely, if their institution hasn't really set aside a budget yet for something, or if there's no person in the organization who really deals with something like that, that might be a flag that it would be at least challenging to bring your value, your solution into this organization. It might not be a great customer. And so even you can ask questions like in Aditya's case, what's your budget for technology every year? How much money have you spent to date on 3D printers? Who in your building is the person who repairs 3D printers when they're broken, to really get a sense of what your resources are if this is the right customer. And then the third thing is that find out other goodies. You really want, if you're all the way at the end of this interview and you feel like this is definitely my customer, they have the problem that I'm trying to solve, they have the budget, there's a will, start to try to find out other things. Where do they get their information? Who do they trust? How might they implement something within their school? So you can start to fill out some of these other aspects of the Lean Canvas that you might have left blank. So a few challenges that I see people face when they're in customer development interviews, and these are all totally okay. These are when pivots happen. One, you realize you're talking to the wrong customer. That you had an assumption, like Aditya, you thought that it was going to be public schools that hadn't bought 3D printers yet. And as you talked to them, you uncovered that they just didn't have the problem you were expecting them to have. They're not the right customer. Maybe they actually do have a problem they're very passionate about, but it's different than the one you thought. Also completely okay. I put a link here to a blog post I absolutely love, which is on tier 1 problems and making sure you're really solving a tier 1, the most painful problem for your customer. Because if you're solving a tier 2 or a tier 3, that means you're probably a nice to have, not a need to have. And that makes it a lot harder to build a business model around. Or this happens, we see this a lot with entrepreneurs at 4.0, is that you find a lot of customers that kind of feel like maybes, and you're trying to cobble together a myriad of customers instead of having kind of one clear profile, which is probably a flag you need to really keep looking for, that one clear customer with one clear problem. And so this is what happened for Aditya. He had a combination of those problems. He had kind of the wrong customer, and he realized that a different customer had a really painful tier 1 problem. What he found out after talking to public schools is that they weren't really ready to implement 3D printers yet. They were shopping around, but it wasn't portability that it was an issue for them. They were just still deciding whether they wanted 3D printers in the first place. But when he started talking to schools that were already implementing 3D printers, which are mostly private and magnet schools, they were really frustrated because they'd sunk a lot of money into buying upwards of 6 3D printers for a school, but they weren't feeling the return on the investment because it took teachers hours and hours to queue up printing for all of the different projects that students were doing. And not very many teachers were willing to put in that kind of time to do that. And so their 3D printers were sitting vacant. And so he realized that it was really more about, maybe actually this value proposition is wrong, but it was more about giving a really easy way for teachers to work the 3D printers that they already had. So that brings us to minimum viable product, which is what Aditya did next. There's a lot of great stuff written about this. Definitely go read some good blog posts. I have some links at the end if you're curious about this. But the goal here is, am I delivering the right value? It's not about whether your solution works exactly the way that you think that it will, testing the how of it. Do they like using it? It's about, is the thing that I'm delivering to them worth it? Is it actually like a painkiller that's solving their problem? And you want to put out the minimum viable product that gives you as much information about that as possible. It could be in the form of feedback, it can be in the form of user signups, but you want to learn is the goal. And my favorite type of Wizard of Oz MVPs, because I think this really illustrates the point about value versus testing your solution, is that you can completely not create the solution that you're envisioning, but just do by hand whatever it is that maybe your tech solution will do or your service will do, and you're behind the curtain. It doesn't matter how you get it done. It matters whether something comes out of the other side that a customer values. So let me just give you a couple examples. So these are all, only the third one on the right is something that they actually let people use. The first two MVPs on the left are something that they put out just to test and get feedback on whether they were proposing the right value. So Buffer and many other startups will put up landing pages where basically you just describe what your service or product will do, what the if you blast your landing page that describes your value to lots of people and no one is signing up, that's probably an indication you're not yet hitting on the value people are looking for. In contrast, like what Dropbox did, you can fake functionality. So Dropbox didn't actually yet have the functionality that it has now when it first started, but they created a video demo that, again, like Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, showed what they could create. And thousands of people signed up to be on their mailing list as a result of that, and they had to build nothing to do that. So again, in those two examples, how can you stop coding, stop coming up with your solution, and just test the idea, the value behind it? And then the Facebook example is starting with the single feature of what you ultimately have in mind. So obviously we know now Facebook has all the bells and whistles, but initially it was just a set of profiles that people could put up. And if people were willing to use that one feature, potentially they would want to use more. So let me show you the example of how Aditya did this with TestLab. Basically, the problem turned out to be that all these pictures on the left of the 3D printing designs, it was taking teachers hours and hours to prepare those files to actually be sent to the printer. It wasn't like a one-click process, and that's really the value that Aditya had a hunch that he could build a software solution to create. So instead of sitting and coding and building that software solution, he just took the process off of teachers' plates, and with a Raspberry Pi plus doing all of the work manually, he gave them the value that the click and send to the printer could eventually provide. And they loved it. They said, yes, like this is what we're looking for. This is so easy. And he realized that, and they were willing to sign up for contracts. If he could create this, they would be willing to pay for it, which is really the question you're trying to answer. So let me pause there for a second. Ben, any questions?
No questions so far. But as you're taking us through, it's great so far. As you're taking us through, maybe you want to address this later or as you continue on, is for anybody that's kind of midway through the process, how do they enter or where do they enter into this process? Like, is this something that every company should want to, should kind of redo every now and then, or do you kind of skip to one part or the other? It might just be something to keep in mind that's a really interesting part of this.
That's awesome and fades very nicely into the last part of what I wanted to share, which is exactly this issue that I think entrepreneurs often feel like they're sort of checking off a part of the process. And I think sometimes these frameworks can feel more linear than they really are. We think that the process kind of feels more like this crazy squiggly line. And so I want to share how we help our entrepreneurs structure their customer development and lean startup processes when they're part of our 4.0 accelerator. And I think that will that can be implemented at any stage of your development, because continually going back and evaluating your lean canvas and saying, do I still have the right pieces, is core to what an entrepreneur is doing. And one of my favorite part of the concept behind the canvas is that it's all about alignment. Your channels have to match your customer and the solution. Your cost has to match what your customer segments can actually pay. And it's not like that's a static thing that exists once you launch your business. So this is a quick proposal of how, as an entrepreneur, you might think about building a process around this. This could be over a week. That's what we push when dealing with really early stage entrepreneurs. This might be over like a month or a longer period of time if you're a more established entrepreneur and the changes and the pivots are happening at a little less frequency. So this is how we do it at 4.0. On Mondays, we push all of our entrepreneurs to have a strategy session with their team that really focuses on prioritizing the assumptions that they need to test. So that might be assumptions about their customer. It might be new assumptions about their solution. If they're a little later stage, it might be an assumption about the channels that they're going to attack to get their product out to the world. And then they finalize a testing plan. Testing plan might mean scheduling the customer development interviews that you need to have. It might be getting a few demos in place. It might be getting a few focus groups in place, but that you have a pathway to validating those assumptions that you have, because that's what this is all about, just validated learning. Then through the week, our entrepreneurs test. They're outside the building, like Steve Blank says. They're hustling, they're meeting with people, they're testing MVPs. And then on Fridays, they come back and it's really a review time. And I love these Fridays because it acknowledges that entrepreneurs are getting so many data points on a daily basis. That's like your job in life, is being a filter for an enormous amount of information and a lot of ambiguity. And so Fridays at 4.0 are an opportunity for entrepreneurs to come back inside the building and synthesize and review and then update that canvas. And so this is what the weekly review looks like. They have this on a massive board in our space at 4.0. You can do this on a whiteboard at your house or wherever. They put on Post-it notes each of the assumptions that they tested this week. And then they write on one Post-it note per person each user or customer that they engaged with this week. Obviously, if there aren't very many Post-it notes under the user or customer section, that's a flag. Might be a flag that somebody got excited about coding something and stayed inside instead of getting outside. Obviously, there's always a balance, but we look for that there's that constant customer engagement happening. The next section is what I heard. This is observations in general, heard, saw. And it's really important. We push entrepreneurs to stay at the observation level before moving on to interpretation. It's a vote for really good note-taking when you're with customers, but what did they actually say? What did they actually do when you observed them engaging with an MVP that you put in front of them? You want to really interrogate reality and think about their words, think about their actions, and make sure that you're not projecting something onto that. Then we move into insights. So based on what you heard, what are you taking away? So when Aditya went and did those first round of customer development interviews and realized, I don't think I'm talking to the right customer. That was an insight based on what he had heard in multiple conversations. And again, insights are hopefully coming because you're seeing themes across multiple people versus being jerked around by just like one customer's perspective. And then finally, next steps, you kind of take a step back, look at the whole thing and say, all right, based on these insights, is one of my assumptions wrong? Is part of my lean canvas not a valid guess? And I need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what my next guess is. Or, great, this MVP was a hit with people. How are we going to move forward on product development with that knowledge in mind? And so we think of it as this continuous cycle where this isn't just happening once, this is happening constantly. And so that's the point back to Ben that I would have on how to implement this. If you're at the very beginning or 2 years into the process, you're always doing this. You're just, you're potentially like changing the questions that you're asking. And that's it. I'll open it up to questions. My email's here. I wanted to flag we have 2 upcoming essentials, one in New Orleans and one in New York. And if you're interested in being part of a group of people for 3 days, it's really getting clear on what are my assumptions and how am I testing them. It can be a great opportunity. And I threw in both Steve Blank keeps a great blog that goes very in depth on all of these issues. And Lean Startup has a really nice wiki that has things like customer development interview templates and a lot of other good stuff. So those are two great places to go to. Ben, do we have questions?
No, we don't, but thank you so much for taking us through that. I mean, it was a really simple framework, a way to think through, what you're facing, and it kind of might uncomfortably push somebody to get out there and, really talk to people to see if their idea is what they think it is. So I think it's a great way to think through that. Thank you. Oh, actually, we got a question that came in. So the question is, what are some of your favorite tools for prototyping, playing the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain game?
Great question. If that person wants to throw in what type of product you're working on, I could refine it a little bit. It really depends. So a Wizard of Oz prototype is used in a situation like Aditya's, where you probably are going to have to build a complex solution, but you can do it yourself and deliver something. I'll give an example. My very favorite example from Eric Ries's Lean Startup book was a grocery store startup that wanted to, I believe it was kind of like Blue Apron or Plated, but it was like they were bringing people ingredients for meals. They were basically doing their grocery shopping for them. And they went door to door until someone said, yes, I will give you $20 to do this. And obviously, eventually, they would have some like beautiful website where she could choose her meal or choose like the theme that she wanted. And they just had it on cards. They were like, okay, cool. Which of these do you want? And then they went to the grocery store and got the stuff for her. I think that was a really good example. Nature Box did something where they put up a website over a weekend, and they went to Whole Foods and bought like all of the snacks at Whole Foods, and then like put them into these little kits, and then put up a website and said, hey, like, do you want to buy one of these? And so without doing all of what they would eventually do, like sourcing things that aren't available at Whole Foods, like having like a whole manufacturing and sending big organization and infrastructure, they just went to Whole Foods themselves, bought the stuff, put the addresses on, and sent it out. So I would just think about like, what can I physically do that can make this happen versus needing any other resources.
Great, thank you. So there's the follow-up is, do you have any examples for like software, like the product software, so like tablets, mobile, how could you go out and kind of use that out in the real world, if you have any examples on that?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is paper prototyping and then showing people wireframes, which are not really Wizard of Oz prototypes. They're more trying to demonstrate the value for something. There's a great podcast called Traction, and that I think is First Round Capital's podcast, and they have some really good examples of software Wizard of Oz prototypes where I think it was like something that involved data crunching, and so they like did it all themselves with no software product. Or another example, we are working with an entrepreneur who wants to bring more financial transparency to schools. And so eventually she envisions kind of like a education-specific version of QuickBooks. But for now, she's just taking the data from the schools, manipulating it in Excel to show what they would actually be able to do and sending it back to them so they can see the type of reports that would be available with her software product, but she doesn't actually have to build the software product until she knows that that's the kind of insight that they're looking for. That's probably the best example.
That is a good example. Thank you. So that's all our questions. I will certainly be sending out the link to this recording, but then also, Katie, if you'd like me to, I can send out both your email address and some of the information about your course. So I can make sure that I send out to everybody so that when they watch it later, they'll know what's going on. How does that sound?
Awesome. That sounds great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if you want to say anything final, but we really appreciate you coming in and giving us another great presentation.
No problem. Thanks all. Appreciate you joining us.
Great.